You see a lot of horrible stories where a husband kills his wife, but this one's different.
We're hearing from the suspect and his side of the story, a story police just don't believe.
A family vanished without a trace. There were no signs of a struggle, no broken doors, and no screaming neighbors. The house looked exactly the way it should have, except for one detail. The people who lived there were gone, and the man who claimed to be searching for them would soon become the center of one of the most disturbing family murder cases in modern American history. Shanann Watts was known as someone who lived loudly and openly. She documented her life online, her marriage, her work, and most importantly, her children. Her daughters, Bella and Celeste, were 4 and 3 years old. Bella was quiet and observant, the kind of child who thought before she spoke. Celeste, known to everyone as Cece, was the opposite. She was energetic, fearless, and rarely silent. Shanann was also pregnant, 15 weeks along with a baby boy, and the couple planned to name Nico. From the outside, the Watts family appeared to be living the kind of life many people work toward. A large home, stable jobs, 2 children, and another one on the way. Chris Watts, Shanann's husband, worked in the oil and gas industry. He was described as a reserved, soft-spoken, and dependable person. Friends, neighbors, they all saw him as a quiet family man, not someone who drew attention to himself. To anyone looking in from the outside, nothing seemed wrong, but behind closed doors, the marriage was unraveling. In the weeks leading up to Shanann's disappearance, the relationship between her and Chris had changed. Chris had become emotionally withdrawn, conversations were strained. The connection she once felt was slipping away. Despite the tension, Shanann believed the family was still worth fighting for, especially with another child on the way. On August 13th, Shanann returned home from a business trip in the early morning hours. By mid-morning, something was clearly wrong.
I called, I texted. Her car's in the garage, her shoes she wears every single day right in the front door.
Shanann wasn't answering her phone. For most people, that might not raise alarm, but for those who knew her, it was immediately concerning. Shanann lived through her phone. She was constantly texting, posting, and responding. Her close friend, Nicole Atkinson, tried calling and then texting and then calling again. Nicole drove to Watts' home. Shanann's car was still in the garage. Her shoes were inside. Her purse was there. The children's car seats hadn't moved. Nicole knew something was wrong. Unable to shake the feeling that something was wrong, Nicole contacted the police and requested a welfare check. Officers from the Frederick Police Department arrived at the home later that day. The house was quiet. No sounds of children. No movement inside. The front door was locked. Nicole explained that Shanann had medical conditions and that leaving without her phone or medication would be extremely out of character. Police contacted Shanann's husband. Chris Watts said he was at work and claimed his wife had taken the children to a friend's house for a play date. But he didn't know which friend and he couldn't provide an address. When Chris arrived at the home, he appeared calm and cooperative. Too calm, as a matter of fact. Police were allowed to enter, and at the first glance, everything looked normal. The beds were made, the home was tidy, there were no signs of forced entry. But as officers moved through the house, inconsistencies began to appear.
This is her purse?
That's her purse. It's her medication. She takes these, her medication's still in here. What about the phone?
Shanann's purse was found inside with her phone and medication still inside it. An EpiPen, which Shanann never left home without due to one of her daughter's severe allergies, was sitting on the counter. The children's favorite blankets were gone. To the officers, the message was becoming clear. Shanann hadn't packed, she hadn't planned to leave, and she hadn't taken the things she would never go without. When asked about the last time he saw his family, Chris said that morning, before leaving for work. According to him, Shanann was asleep in bed. The girls were in their rooms. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, but the police were uneasy. And families don't just disappear without money, phones, or transportation. Something about this situation didn't add up. And soon, a neighbor would provide information that shifted the case from a missing family investigation to something far more serious. Across the street from the Watts home lived a man who had installed security cameras after a series of neighborhood thefts.
If any action would have happened, any cars or anything left your house, I would have been like right in that area. They should have picked. Oh, it'll pick up anything coming down the street this way. You know where that trigger is? Oh yeah. Okay.
On the morning Shanann disappeared, the camera had recorded unusual movements. At around 5:30 a.m., Chris Watts' work truck was seen backed into his driveway, something he rarely did. Normally, he parked on the street. Over the next several minutes, the footage showed Chris repeatedly walking back and forth between the garage and the driver's side of the truck. The camera angle couldn't show what he was carrying, but it showed enough to raise serious questions.
We parked out there on the side. I just want to get everything back in. Be easier to load everything out there, all the tools that I had to bring in. Loaded my stuff up in my coolers, my water jugs, my book bag, my computers, some of the tools that I had in the toolbox. I knew I was going to have to do some pumping into rubbers today. That's why I was out so far.
No footage ever showed Shanann leaving the house. No footage showed anyone picking her up. And no footage showed the children leaving either.
No cars came through because I guarantee with the headlights, it picked up the headlights.
Oh yeah. And my Vivint said that by 27, my garage door was left open.
When Chris watched the video alongside the police, officers noticed his behavior change. He clearly avoided looking at the screen. He checked his phone repeatedly. His body language appeared tense and distracted.
No.
Chris said he left for work early that morning around 5:30 a.m. He claimed his wife and children were alive and asleep when he left. The neighbor's camera showed no activity involving Shanann or the girls after that time. No movement, no vehicles, no sign of life. If Chris was telling the truth, then 3 people had vanished without leaving the house, without phones, wallets, medications, nor car seats. That scenario didn't make sense. As hours turned into days, a missing endangered alert was issued for Shanann Watts and her 2 daughters. News crews gathered outside the home, and Chris Watts stepped in front of the cameras.
That she's somewhere safe right now and with the kids. I just want them back. I just want them to come back. And if they're not safe right now, that's what's tearing me apart. Because if they are safe, they're coming back. But if they're not, this has got to stop. Like, somebody has to come forward.
Or did you guys get into an argument before she left?
It wasn't like an argument. We had an emotional conversation, but I'll leave it at that. But it's just, I want everybody to just come home. Like, wherever they're at, come home. That's what I want. Shanann, Bella, Celeste, if you're out there, just come back. Like, if somebody has her, just please bring her back.
His words didn't match his tone. He showed no visible panic, no desperation, no urgency. To many watching, he appeared emotionally detached, more like someone giving a statement than a husband begging for his family's return. Behind the scenes, police were no longer treating this as a simple missing persons case. Detectives re-entered the home with forensic teams. They searched for signs of struggle, blood, or cleanup. Nothing obvious was found. The house was almost unnervingly clean, but something else stood out. The top sheet from the master bed was missing. In an otherwise orderly home, that detail felt out of place. At this point, investigators reached out to the Colorado Bureau of Investigation and the FBI for assistance. Despite the growing scrutiny, Chris remained cooperative. He agreed to come in for a formal interview at the police department. At this stage, he was not under arrest. Investigators needed his version of events in detail. He described Shanann returning home in the early hours after her trip. He described an emotional conversation about their marriage, and he described her leaving later that morning with the children. The more he talked, the more inconsistencies appeared. His story felt rehearsed. Investigators knew they needed to move carefully. At this point, Chris was the last person to see his family alive. That fact alone didn't make him guilty. But combined with the surveillance footage, the missing personal items, the emotional detachment, and the timeline gaps, the focus of the investigation was beginning to narrow. To determine whether Chris was being truthful, investigators made a critical decision. They asked him to return the following day for a polygraph examination. Chris agreed, and that decision would change everything. The next morning, Chris Watts returned to the police department for the scheduled polygraph examination. He didn't come alone. His father had just arrived from out of state and accompanied him to the station, a sign that the pressure of the situation was beginning to weigh on him. Chris said he felt sick to his stomach. He told investigators he was terrified that someone had taken his family. But while Chris repeated the same explanation he had given the day before, investigators had learned something new, something he hadn't mentioned. During the overnight review of Chris's phone records, investigators uncovered evidence of an ongoing affair. Chris had been romantically involved with a co-worker for weeks. The relationship included intimate messages, photographs, and discussions about a future together, a family that didn't include his wife nor children. This discovery immediately changed the dynamics of the case. If Chris had been lying about the affair, investigators had to ask themselves what else he was lying about. But they chose not to confront him with the information right away. Instead, they watched and waited, and the test began.
So when I ask you the question on the test, I'm not asking you about guilt. I'm not asking you about, did you make her feel so horrible that she ended up leaving? I'm saying that you were the one that physically caused her to disappear. Okay. Either by murder, kidnapping, all of those other things that we went through, okay?
You want me to list all those?
No. You're just going to say no to that question.
Okay.
Right. When I ask you if you physically caused Shanann's disappearance, your answer should be what?
No.
Right. All right, you ready?
Let's do it.
The test is about to begin. Please remain still. Is your first name Christopher?
Yes.
Did you physically cause Shanann's disappearance?
No.
Were you born in 1985?
Yes.
Are you lying about the last time you saw Shanann?
No.
Are you now in the state of Colorado?
Yes.
Do you know where Shanann is now?
No.
This portion of the test is complete. Please remain still while I take the instrument out of operation. All right, how'd you feel?
He showed strong indications of deception on every critical question. When investigators returned to the room, the friendly approach was gone. Chris was informed that he had not passed the polygraph. He immediately protested. He insisted the results were wrong, but investigators were firm. The focus was no longer on finding his family. It was on what he had done to them. As pressure increased, Chris searched for an explanation, something he could admit to without fully confessing. That's when he mentioned the affair. He claimed he hadn't wanted to involve the other woman to ruin her life, but investigators already knew, and they made sure he understood that. The affair wasn't the real issue, it was only the doorway to something much worse. Investigators shifted tactics. They introduced the possibility. What if Shanann had harmed the children? What if Chris had only reacted afterward? This approach wasn't an accusation, it was a test. If Chris was innocent, he would reject it. Instead, he hesitated, then he leaned into it. He suggested that Shanann might have hurt the girls, that he had walked in on something terrible, that he had panicked. It was a calculated move, an attempt to shift blame onto someone who could no longer defend herself. Investigators listened, they didn't believe him. At this point, Chris asked to speak with his father. The request put investigators in a difficult position. Allowing a suspect to speak privately with family can end an interrogation instantly. One word, lawyer, and everything stops. But investigators believed Chris was close to breaking. They agreed. Chris's father was brought into the room. The two spoke quietly, and then Chris said something that changed everything.
favors are gone. And I put my hands around my wife's neck and did that same thing.
Did Shanann fight back at all?
Chris told his father that Shanann was dead. He claimed she had killed the children and that he had killed her in response. It was a partial confession, a self-serving one, but it was enough. Investigators now had what they needed. There was one thing investigators needed more than words. They needed to find the bodies. Under mounting pressure, Chris finally revealed where to look. He directed investigators to his work site, an oil field known as Servi 319. He said Shanann was buried there, and he admitted the children were not buried at all. They were somewhere else, somewhere far west. It was an isolated area filled with dirt roads, heavy machinery, and storage tanks. The search began. The sun had barely risen. Investigators followed Chris's direction cautiously, knowing the potential for deception. Minutes felt like hours. Then, in a shallow grave near a storage tank, they found Shanann Watts. She had been strangled. Her body was carefully hidden, but not well enough to escape discovery. The air grew heavier. The officers maintained their composure, but the weight of what they were seeing was unmistakable. Chris had described the children's fate as separate from Shannon's. Investigators pressed him for details. Finally, Chris admitted to hiding the girls' bodies in oil tanks at the same site. The grim reality became clear. Bella, 4, and Celeste, 3, were found in large storage tanks, suffocated and lifeless. The scene was devastating. The investigation had confirmed the unimaginable. The children were dead, victims of their father's actions. After the recovery, Chris Watts was immediately taken into custody. He was charged with first-degree murder of his wife, Shanann, first-degree murder of his 2 daughters, unlawful termination of a pregnancy. Shanann had been weeks pregnant, tampering with evidence, multiple counts of lying to authorities. The weight of the charges was overwhelming. Chris sat silently, his face expressionless. No one in the room spoke. The truth of what had happened had finally been laid bare. The motive became clear. The affair with a co-worker, the desire for a fresh start without his family, and a calculated attempt to cover up the crime. Chris's actions were premeditated. Everything from the strangulation to the burial had been planned, though his initial statements had suggested otherwise. Chris Watts ultimately pleaded guilty to avoid the death penalty. He received multiple life sentences without the possibility of parole. The case remains one of the most chilling examples of domestic homicide in recent history. It is remembered not just for the tragedy, but for the meticulous police work that uncovered the truth despite attempts to mislead and manipulate.